A small reflection in the service of attempting to slake our connoisseurs' joy for being one more time. So, on the one side of you have um, a Western statement such as the thing which is behind me, which I can't see, is nonetheless still there, even though I'm not now perceiving it. On the other hand, we know the Cohen, which is said in parallel to such things as what's the sound of one hand clapping, which is not meant to indicate apparently that you can really strain and then sort of make a little sound with one hand clapping, but apparently to indicate something that goes beyond our normal thinking. Um, this is said apparently in the same way that the saying, "What is the sound of it if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it? Does it make a sound?" Um, this is apparently regarded as something beyond uh, the reach of ordinary thinking. Of course, in these East Asian traditions, we don't have this figure of nous, as it were, the idea of the thing that's eternal, hanging outside of the passions, in the logos type, in the highest part of the suke, and perhaps also in the angels that are only distinguishable from God, and that they're still drawing inferences and thinking through things, although without a body to disturb them and to set them against their higher nature being reason. Such a conception of reason, or the modern conception of reason, which is a utilitarian reason, uh, neither of these, even if we could find some things in East Asian culture, even in the Confucian tradition itself, in the Wenren scholars themselves, and the, um, the literati officials, I mean, even if we could find it there in their writings, it would just be by the way. It wouldn't be the essence of the tradition. It wouldn't be what uh, floods everything with a blinding light until it seems like we're in the furthest recesses of the cave for our forgetfulness of the source of this light. That isn't there in the Eastern tradition. So we can say it's interesting to compare the sense of the Western tradition with knowledge says, what is the sound there if no one was there to witness it? And they conclude matter of factly, yes, of course it was. Um, is something there 14 billion years ago, even though there's no witness to it? Yes, of course it happened that way. Um, so comparing that to the Zen koan, that's, um, wherever the axis mundi is here of these different world interpretations, if you like, it's not clear that one's pointing north and the other is pointing south, but rather something closer to um, the directions are so much different that they couldn't even be imagined in a three-dimensional Cartesian space. What is happening there? So these are totally incomparable in that sense. Taken from that point, this absence is already the absence of this place where now in, say, Berkeley's thinking, really God is being placed. So, or then so you see no one's there to witness it. There's the thing, the tree falls. Did it make a sound? Well, supposedly, according to George Berkeley, God must have been there to hear that sound. This also links up to the theory that reason is adequate to the world. Like, it can somehow link up to the world. Now, given that in the current tradition, it's like there's appearances and then there's just a sequence of appearances, and this we call causality. And he's throwing out a lot of things in the tradition, but nonetheless, that's just a modification of the Western thinking. You still speak of causality, aitia, in the older tradition, in Aristotle and Plato, but you speak of it just in a different inflection, as it were, in a different self-similarity, so to speak. It's changed its size, maybe it's changed its shape, but it's continuing in its genealogy. This causality, which is linked to the so-called actual thing, the thing that's actually there, this whole thinking, one must say, must be some gain in the transfer of meaning with the Far East. And so Leo Strauss said throughout his career, Heidegger intimated that some way a rapprochement with the East would be very beneficial to Western thinking. But then Heidegger understands himself as the culmination, as the supreme point of Western thinking, his Dasein and being as the supreme point. So is this then, as it were, made part of this new title system, this unheard of admixture across the Pacific, I suppose, across the long Pacific. So there's a lot of difficulties in there if we are to interpret Heidegger not as, so to speak, speaking of what is ultimate, but rather as speaking of what is ultimate under the condition that we say ultimate for the Western history, ultimate for Western Dasein. This is multiplied in the opacity of it, in the difficulty of thinking through it, in that we can only grasp the other traditions through the Western tradition, through its lens, so that then in speaking of the Russian Dasein and speaking of the Japanese Dasein, we're still therefore not confronting the other Dasein. So that's a deep difficulty there. I think Dugin is in his own way working with that problem and thinking through that problem. That this is so again, that problem of the thing that's there even without the perception does seem to be in Heidegger, in the sense that on the one hand there's existence or perception, and then on the other hand there's sort of the world in the way it's dreaming, the significance of that perception. And then in addition, in a sub-problem, you could say the whole logical sequence of how things once grasped in a picture could then be plugged into a logical structure, into a rule-based utilitarian rationality system, where which, by the way, I've noticed, I believe this is a simple refutation of, at least at the level of the historical meaning of the fact-value distinction of the Harris notion. Harris says he denies the fact-value distinction on the basis that a probabilistic account could be given that says that you're likely to die, you have a 30% likelihood of falling prey to a given ailment if you were to engage in the profession of astronaut. So perhaps it is something to do with the change in the gravity, the power of the pressure on your body, that has to do with going into space, for instance. Maybe you have some possible infirmity of your bone structure or something like that. He thinks that based on a probabilistic argument, that one could conclude that this is not just a mere fact, but this is also an ought, das Sollen. This is like a Kantian duty, I suppose. He doesn't clarify whether he wants to say a duty, whether he wants to say this will make you happy for its own right, whether it's necessary, utilitarian, necessary to do it. But he just says it's not. There's no fact value distinction here because we can get our prescription on how to act from the data. But what he's appealing to is the modern presupposed, I say presupposed because I don't think he's actually confronted the Socratic sense of reason or the Plato, Xenophon, Aristotle, and so forth sense of what reason means in the tradition. Even in Hobbes and Machiavelli, it still was surviving the tradition which understands reason as something quite different from utility. For instance, that somebody would say, no matter how good a bet something is, I'm not going to bet against my country, or I'm not going to bet against the life of my child or something, no matter how statistically good a bet it is. Bayesian reasoning or rationality understood as the maximalization of our beliefs plus the probability that they'll pay off in some way, in some value. It can't handle, as it were, steadfast resolution towards something that it grants an unconstrained favor to. If there's an unconstrained favor for justice, for instance, then you can't sort of bribe that you can't become a brigand who will take money for forgetting about justice. It would be a complete value. So the current dominant decision theory type theories of rationality deny that there could be justice in the full sense, in just in the sketchy way I put it in what I just said. Of course, there's much more to it. Taken this way, again, this whole concept of reason, the whole thinking, which is sort of in a tremulous way in the prototype of everything, that has something to do with what why Heidegger's interpreting logos as the calculative, as this which was always had a chance to become this world picture. Okay, so that was kind of the intermezzo, but our interlude. But we'll try to go back to the Kant as against Heidegger and what's happening with the noumenal, and maybe some comments for people who remember it from a bad youth or misspent youth, Rudolf Otto and his idea of the numinous. Okay.